Hello, my name is Christina McLennan, and today I will be reviewing the 1946 film It's a Wonderful Life. This has now become a Christmas classic, but it was originally just a family movie, a drama movie, and a fantasy movie. My family has a running joke about this film because every year for Christmas we'll go to sit down and watch it, but I am the only one who has ever seen the film in its entirety. Everybody else always falls asleep because it is a 2-hour and 10-minute film. So it's just a running joke every Christmas that we watch it and I'm the only one that's ever seen it. This film was directed by Frank Capra. The screenplay was written by him, Francis Goodrich, and Albert Hackett. The story was written by Philip von Dorenstern, and it was inspired by the 1944 short story The Greatest Gift. This was an RKO Pictures production. The film stars James Stewart as George Bailey, Donna Reed as Mary Hackett, Henry Travers as Clarence the guardian angel who's trying to earn his wings, Lionel Barrymore as Mr. Potter, the greedy, extremely rich businessman, and Thomas Mitchell as Uncle Billy, who ends up being George Bailey's business partner. So a brief plot summary of the movie. It starts out by showing how extremely selfless George Bailey is, and it starts off when he's really little and his brother is sledding on a shovel down a big hill and goes into the water through the ice and starts to drown. So George jumps in and saves him, but he ends up losing the hearing in his left ear. He's also extremely selfless with Mr. Gowers, who's the druggist in town. He gets the telegram that his son unexpectedly died of the influenza. So when he's putting pills together, he puts poison in one of them by accident. George catches it and tells him, so then everything's okay because the mistake was caught and George never says anything about it. He sacrifices his dreams to travel because he needs to save the town from the extremely rich, power-hungry Mr. Potter. The main portion of this film takes place on Christmas Eve when Uncle Billy loses $8,000. George knows that he will get blamed for this and sent to jail, meaning that Mr. Potter will come in, take over the business, and eventually take over the town, which he does not want to happen. George then decides that he's worth more dead than he is alive, because that is what Mr. Potter tells him exactly. So he decides that he is going to go and take his own life. He goes to a bridge and goes to jump off, but he's saved by Clarence, his guardian angel. He's talking to Clarence and he ends up saying that he wishes he was never born. So Clarence decides to show him a life where George Bailey was never born. In this life, his brother does die that day that he was sledding and fell through the ice. Mr. Gowers does make that mistake and poison that kid, and then he ends up being an extreme laughingstock of the town because he poisoned a little boy. Mr. Potter has taken over the town, so it's now Pottersville instead of Bedford Falls. After seeing how everyone else's lives were without him, George realizes that he has positively impacted a lot of people around him and that he has touched a lot of lives and that everything is so different without him. He ends up telling Clarence that this isn't what he wants. He wants to go back to his real life because he realizes how important he is in the grand scheme of everything. One of the most famous quotes from this film is, "Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?" So Clarence says that because he's helping George realize that he does make such a big impact on everyone around him. So in the end, George comes back and they do end up finding that $8,000. His business is saved from Mr. Potter and everybody is just at his house singing, having a great time. The very first image in this film is a bell ringing, and they keep saying how every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings, so I think that's a nice parallel and a nice way to set up the film. Then it cuts to stars in the galaxy blinking as they're talking to talk about how George Bailey needs help. There's all these people praying for him, like his mother, his wife, his children, his uncle, and they're all praying for him because they know that he's having a really rough time. So the stars are talking, and then they send for Clarence, who's looking to get his wings, and they explain to him how George has been his whole life, saying how he's been selfless and everything. And so this is a great way to start the film because it sets up the entire thing, and by telling Clarence about George's whole life, it ends up telling us about it, which is a great double dip, so that way we don't feel like we're given too much information from the get-go, but we are getting everything we needed because they're telling Clarence this whole story. The film ends with a lot of people in the town in George Bailey's house singing Auld Lang Syne, which is a really nice picture, especially for a Christmas film. And also one of his children is holding a bell and says, "Oh, an angel gets its wings every time a bell rings." So I think that was a nice parallel from the beginning with the bell ringing, and then at the end, the child knowing that every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. The technology used to make this film was pretty standard for the time. However, they did come up with a new innovation for how they could make fake snow. They used to just paint cornflakes and then have those fall, but then all the audio had to be dubbed back over. So they decided to mix this material called foamite with soap and water, so then they could have it fall and it would be silent, so they didn't have to worry about dubbing the sound back over. So that way it was just, they would talk and not have to worry about it. The lighting throughout this film is very soft, especially for close-ups, and especially when they're showing Mary's close-up. She appears to glow, and it's very soft lighting because she is such a nice woman and she's so sweet. So they like to show that using the lighting on her face, which I think was a really nice technique. The camera angles used throughout this film were very different throughout because there were a lot of close-ups, but then there were a lot of shots that were shot from far away. Sometimes it would pan across to follow them, sometimes it was stationary, so I thought they did a really good job adding a lot of variety into this. The sound quality throughout the film is actually a lot better than I expected for such an older movie, and it's so much better than the early sound films that we've watched previously. There are some moments though where there's like a little bit of a goof up because either the mouths aren't exactly following the audio, or there's points where you hear people talking but then their mouths aren't moving at all. There's also a goof in the film when Uncle Billy is stumbling drunk and he's going home and he goes off screen and stumbles into a bunch of trash cans, but he says, "Oh, I'm all right, I'm okay." And it ends up that this was actually a stagehand on set. He dropped a bunch of trays, and so the actor improvised those lines, and they liked it so much that they kept it in the film. So I thought that that was really interesting because they didn't want to redo the whole scene with all this new sound work and everything, so they kept it in there, and I thought that was really interesting. This film has left a huge influence over American culture. It's one of the biggest Christmas movies of all time. It's an extremely inspirational film, and it's also referenced in a lot of different shows and movies today. Anytime that a character wishes they were never born and then sees the life that there is without them, that's a direct reference to It's a Wonderful Life. This happens in an episode of The Fairly Odd Parents and in Shrek Forever After. In The Fairly Odd Parents, Timmy wishes he was never born and then sees his life. In Shrek Forever After, Shrek wishes to forget a day, like to have a day that he forgets to never have happened, and that ends up being the day that he was born, so then he sees life play out without him. There's also a reference in Bruce Almighty. So in the film, George Bailey says that he would give Mary the moon, he'd lasso it in for her, so then in Bruce Almighty, Bruce does lasso the moon in. There was no major backlash for this film. There was a bit of editing that had to be done with a kiss between George and Mary because they needed to edit it down for TV. But there wasn't any big backlash or anything. It was a flop in the box office, which was a little sad for me to hear, but it's still such a huge movie. Everybody knows this film, so I don't think it really matters that it was such a flop because it still is being shown today and everybody knows this film. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoy this film if you decide to watch it, or if you don't, then I hope you just enjoyed this review. Thank you.